Hi, Dr. Kevin Windisch from Sparks Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine here, coming to you from somewhere in the deep south, um, in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. Um, Sorry, I'm working with different technology than I'm used to. What I wanted to talk about today was FDA approval and the whole chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine thing, because there's a lot of misinformation going around about this, and I think it's important to set the record straight on how these things work. So, the first thing to realize is when a drug receives FDA approval, it is approved for very specific uses in a very specific set of patients, and those sets are, males between 15 and 45 or whatever age group that the tests have been done on. Okay. And once it receives FDA approval, a drug can then be used for any indication in any subset of patients because it's now legal to prescribe within the United States. Insurances may not pay for it, but it is legal to prescribe. So what does FDA labeling really mean? It means that a drug, at least in theory, has been proven to be safe and effective for the given use in the age group that we're specifically discussing. Okay. So how does this kind of apply to the chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, quinine thing? Well, chloroquine, quinine, and hydroxychloroquine are FDA approved for use in the United States. As such, they can be prescribed to anybody at any time for any reason. And no additional work needs to be done in order to do that, per se. Now, with regards to COVID-19, is this safe? Is this effective? Well, we really don't know. Okay. What we do know is this. We know that there was a very small study, very preliminary, came out of France, and then some Chinese experience that suggests that maybe there is some advantage to using hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine in patients with COVID-19. These studies are inherently flawed. This is hardly definitive data. Okay. We do know that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are approved for use in the United States. We know that we use them all the time, and we know they're generally pretty safe. What we don't know is, are these drugs safe for use in COVID-19 patients? Is there some sort of inherent metabolic derangement that takes place in patients with COVID-19 that would preclude the use of these drugs in these patients? We have no way of knowing because up until now they've not been used because COVID-19 didn't exist until 6 months ago. We know how to dose chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine for the prevention of malaria, for the treatment of malaria, for the treatment of lupus and some other rheumatologic diseases. We have no idea how to dose it for COVID-19, assuming it's safe and assuming it's actually effective. These are some big assumptions. We just don't know. We assume that the dose would be the same that we use for everything else, but again, making some big assumptions. So, is it illegal to prescribe the drug for COVID-19? Well, per se, not at least as far as the federal government is concerned. So, what's the big deal? Well, when you don't know if a drug is safe, you do need to worry. Are we going to kill patients with this? If you don't know if the drug is effective and how to best dose it, we don't even know when to best give it. Do you reserve it for patients who are on ventilators? Do you reserve it to prevent the disease in patients? Do you reserve it for patients who only have mild disease because patients on ventilators are too far gone to benefit from the drug? We don't know. If you start giving the drug to everybody, we don't have enough supplies in this country. You couldn't give it to everybody. That'll result in hoarding, etc. It'll also restrict access of the drug for the patients for whom we know it is safe and effective, your lupus patients, your arthritis patients, and so on. So we're trying to preserve drug supply as well. Does this mean you should withhold the drug in COVID-19 patients? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not an ethicist. Um, and the law regarding who you can give it to and how much you can give and blah, blah, blah varies from state to state and is changing from day to day. So I'm not going to weigh in on that. So what's the story with all of this? We have to do more testing. We can't just use the drug. Well, what it really comes down to is because there's so much we don't know. Nobody wants to say, yes, we should, give a wholesale endorsement of this drug to everybody with COVID-19 and we'll just put everybody on it, use up our national supplies, endanger the lives of lupus patients, etc., for something that's of dubious value at best and could potentially be dangerous for use in COVID-19 patients. And when I say potentially, I mean anything's possible. Was there any specific evidence to suggest you shouldn't be using this in COVID-19 patients? No, nothing in particular. But there's a lot we don't know. And until we know, we don't know. Does this mean if you get COVID-19, you shouldn't get hydroxychloroquine? I don't know the answer to that. And that's outside of what I'm trying to discuss here. My goal is to discuss FDA approval. Okay. So if a drug is not FDA approved, maybe you just shouldn't use it off label, is kind of the next question. Well, there's case law about that. And case law says that if a drug is considered standard of care and you withhold it because it's off label and there's a bad outcome, the doctor is liable for malpractice. And to give you an idea of how arbitrary FDA approval can be, going back some time ago in my career, and I don't know where we are in this world right now, because I haven't looked at this lately, but going back a couple of years ago, a drug called albuterol that we use for asthma was FDA approved in a nebulizer for use down to age 2 if it was name brand. I'm sorry, down to age 6 months if it was name brand, and down to age 2 if it was generic. So you couldn't use the generic for all of the patients that you could use the name brand for, even though the FDA says these are equivalent drugs. Well, that made absolutely no sense. But that was the way the labeling was for years and years. I don't know if it's changed now, but for years that was the way it was. And at that same time, there was a drug called levoalbuterol, which is roughly half of the dose of albuterol. And for half the dose, it's equally effective, and it's got roughly a third of the side effects. That was only FDA approved down to 6 years of age, even though it was the safer of the alternatives. So what does that mean for COVID-19 patients? Well, again, it just means there's a lot we don't know. Hoarding is a bad thing. Making sure we have access to this medication for patients who have lupus and have arthritis is critical. There are potential side effects from these drugs. They're real, they're well known, including retinal toxicity and blindness. So we do need to be careful, but some of the news makes it sound like, well, the drug's not approved, so you can't use it. Well, that's not completely accurate either. And one of my goals with this video series has always been to dispel myths, make sure everybody has the full story and really understands kind of the subtle details. And I know these are a lot of subtle details. And I'm not giving you the answers you want, which is to say, yeah, you should use it. No, don't use it. We don't know. Okay, but what I want you to understand is the limitations of the science and the limitations of the FDA approval process, because there's just so much that goes into this. They make it sound in the news like you can only get the drug for compassionate use, and there is a procedure to get drugs that are not FDA approved for use in patients that are dying. And we use this in this process in rare metabolic diseases, and was used, for example, during the Ebola crisis, where we had novel drugs, brand new drugs that had never been used before in humans, that we got permission to use, even though they weren't FDA approved. This drug is FDA approved. This is not a compassionate use basis. It's just not FDA approved for COVID-19 or any other viral disease. So it's off-label, not compassionate use, but off-label. I don't know if I want to get into this in this video or not, but I guess I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So then the next question is, well, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, quinine, these are parasite drugs. What the heck are they used for in a virus? And the answer is, well, first of all, we don't know if it works. So maybe it's a waste of everybody's energy. All right, but at least the theory is these drugs alter the amount of acid inside of the cells, and that then causes some metabolic derangements that make it impossible or more difficult for the virus to replicate. That was one of the early theories. Some of the other theories is that it actually keeps you from getting sicker or dying, because a lot of what seems to be killing people is an inflammatory response from the virus. So it's not viral infection itself, but inflammation from the virus. And we know the drug has anti-inflammatory properties, which is why we use it in lupus and in arthritis. So maybe it works by that mechanism. Maybe it works by both mechanisms. That'll be 50 years to figure out. But there is some theory to support its value, and at least a couple of small studies to support its value, but they're dubious at best. This is not something you can hang your hat on, and most definitely not the greatest of sciences. But we're in kind of a crisis situation. So doctors, just like patients, are grasping at straws. We want something to help our patients. So that's kind of where we are. I hope this dispels some myths and helps you to kind of understand what's going on. I've got a video coming up. I've got to figure out, because I've got serious technology issues right now, but I got to figure out a way to do it that'll talk a little bit more about what exactly viruses are, what COVID-19 is, and hopefully help you to understand why this disease is a little bit different from stuff we've seen in the past. Anyway, this is Dr. Kevin Windisch from Sparks Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine. That office is now closed. I'm hiding somewhere in the deep south. And I'll see you next time.